Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about this Taliban Spring Offensive 2019. As we all know that a few days ago, what we witnessed in Kunduz, that there was this attack. And if you remember earlier, Kunduz was very briefly captured by the Taliban in 2015 also. Now this is a northwestern city and province of Afghanistan, where according to the official sources of the Afghan government, they believe that around 4 soldiers were killed, whereas 15 plus Taliban were killed in that attack. But according to the Taliban, things are pretty different, and they believe that they can launch offensive. I mean, the fight is going on in almost all the major provinces, even in Helmand, which is known for its poppy cultivation. But interestingly, now when we see this, there are two major factors which we will be talking about. One, that the Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid has very categorically mentioned that despite the ongoing peace process and the talks, the Afghan government as well as the Americans, they have launched massive attacks on the Taliban. So this is in retaliation that he says that, well, the process of ongoing negotiations, that is going to continue. But having said that, this is also going to continue. So again, whenever the month of March and April comes, we have always seen this phenomenon of spring offensive by the Taliban fighters. Now, Zalmay Khalilzad has also said that despite this ongoing Taliban offensive, the peace process is not going to get derailed. But he wasn't very happy about this. Rather, he was pretty concerned that this is not going to derail or sabotage the peace process. But having said that, this could create problems. But now, obviously, it is from both the parties, the Taliban as well as the negotiation team of the Afghan government or the Americans supporting them. Where is it going to lead? What sort of measures should be taken in order to make sure that the ongoing peace process should yield some positive results? At least something should happen, because a lot of expectations are attached as far as these negotiations are concerned, because this is an ongoing process. They've been taking place in Pakistan, in China, they've been in Doha, Qatar for that matter, or otherwise in so many other countries as well. But let's see how it proceeds. Things are not that great in Afghanistan at the moment as we speak. Let me introduce you to our panelists we have with us in our studio. On my right is Ambassador Ali Sarwar Naqvi Sahab, Senior Diplomat. Needs no further introduction, sir. Thank you very much. And we have with us Brigadier Retired Salim Kamar Butt Sahab. He's a senior analyst, sir. Thank you very much. And we'll also be talking to Professor Syed Muhammad Ali. He's an international relations expert and adjunct professor, George Washington University, USA. Thank you very much, Professor Saab, for taking out your time and talking to us, sir. So if you allow me, let's go to Washington first and let's see what exactly is being taught out in USA regarding this particular Taliban spring offensive. Now, Professor Saab, a couple of very straight questions. For example, do you think this offensive recently launched by the Taliban fighters, and they claim that because the Americans and the Afghan authorities are exerting a lot of pressure on them and they are targeting them, so this is in retaliation. But earlier we've also witnessed that this phenomena has been there for quite some time now. Do you think this particular tussle or the ongoing attacks on each other is going to derail this very important peace process from which the entire globe is expecting a little too much, I guess? Sir, your take.
Well, like you rightly said, that this spring offensive. I mean, like the weather over the last 18 years, we've been seeing a, 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 a rec- can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Okay. So over the last 18 years, we've been seeing this recurrent crisis, and around spring, we see this aggression, occur. And basically, what's happening this year is, I mean, yes, the offensive has started. However, this is, there is also simultaneously, we saw the US signaling and the Taliban also saying that the Qatar talks are still on. In Moscow, a few months earlier, there were also talks. So now the important talks, I mean, yes, the conversation between Khalilzad and the Taliban uh, representative is important. However, because the Taliban still have issues negotiating the government, and that also brings in tensions vis-a-vis the Afghan government and the US current US administration's approach towards peaceful negotiation. However, the very important thing to watch here, they've already been, like I just said, in Moscow a couple of months ago, and it's a follow-up of that in Qatar. These talks between so the intra-Afghan talks are something to be watching out, which are supposed to happen quite soon. And subsequent to that are going to be the US talks again. And they've already signaled that both those talks are. And the interesting thing is that in that conversation between civil society last time in Moscow, the Karzai was there. Let's see what comes out of those discussions. The Taliban have said that they are also going to have some women from their side talking to these other civil society groups, which unofficially will include Afghan government representatives as well, perhaps. So that is really, because these other talks have taken place between US and Taliban forces, and both of them have their positions on these issues. But there's now some of this other interesting stuff which has begun happening, which gives some ray of hope to this long conflict-ridden region.
All right. Ambassador Saab, some ray of hope is still there. This is what Professor Saab was saying. But sir, this has been, as earlier mentioned, it's a wrong phenomenon. It's been almost 17, 18 years now. Every time the spring approaches, the snow melts on the mountains, and then this offensive is witnessed. Not only in certain cities, but sir, almost all over Afghanistan, especially where there is a stronghold of the Taliban. They have a lot of presence. Now, sir, as you earlier heard that the Taliban, they have a claim to make, and they say that because of the Afghan and the American aggression, this is in retaliation. Is this in retaliation, sir, or this is a regular phenomenon which they always try to use, and they always try to keep things in their hand? They want to hold the strings because they believe that this is going to be, something which is going to provide them to talk with the other party from a position of strength.
Yes. Well, Faisal, there are several strands or several threads in this whole situation. The first is that this is seasonal, and I agree with you that this happens every time. I mean, whenever the snows melt and there is a better weather for going out to do their offensive, they do it. And that is something that, in fact, the Afghan Taliban are prone to benefit from the weather change, climate change. Now, that's one. But the other is, and that to me is interesting, that there is an evolution in the situation. And the evolution is that before, you will recall that the Taliban were not even willing to talk to the Afghan government. But now there is a kind of tacit acceptance of the Afghans, and that is what I think Muhammad Ali was talking about, of this intra-Afghan dialogue. Now, that is one. No, that is the second strand. The third is the American role and what the Americans want. So, the Americans, I think Zalmay seems to be reasonably optimistic, and Zalmay is seeing beyond the current sort of problems. He is looking at it from in a longer perspective. And therefore, I think if you draw up a balance sheet, the positive seems to be getting the better of the negative. And this, I think, if this continues, then I think there will be some progress. Now, you talked about the strong action taken by the Americans and the Afghan army forces against Taliban. I think, yes, this is, what it was called jaw, fight. I mean, they talk, they will talk, and they will also keep asserting their strength.
But this kind of a formula or this kind of an arrangement, has it ever worked before, sir?
Well, you see,
take it as a case study.
It depends upon the basic determination or will on each side. If there is a on the American side, there is a will, because now the Americans want to clear out, or at least reduce their presence in a substantial manner. And on the Taliban side, I think the Taliban think that they are in a fairly strong position vis-a-vis the Afghan government, and therefore they can take the plunge of having some kind of power share, some kind of share. In fact, eventually it will be like the camel, the proverbial camel, which puts its head into the tent and then throws out the person sleeping in the tent. I mean, they are making their inroad. They are making their slowly they are making their inroad into power sharing. And once they have got it, then they might as well chuck this Afghan government altogether, because they.
And this is the biggest fear of the Afghan government, sir.
Well,
Afghan
this
forces,
is the
yes.
biggest fear, because basically the original problem was that in the Bonn Agreement the Taliban were excluded, and so was Pakistan. I mean, the Americans decided to hold a conference in Bonn in 2002, and then they established a government which brought in President Karzai and his setup. And this second round of election was, there was the two rounds of election with Karzai, and the third round, this present time, was a disaster, because there was no clear winner, and John Kerry had to come and negotiate between them and somehow install a government. So the original sin of the lack of legitimacy of the Afghan government is something that the Taliban are very, very mindful of, and therefore we'll have to see what happens, what will be the fate of the Afghan government. But the Pakistani perspective is that we want peace and stability in Afghanistan, and for that I think Pakistan would be happy to cooperate or help as much as possible.
And this is what we are doing
That's what we
since ages, sir, but at least our role should be recognized. Some appreciation should be awarded to us
Yes.
also. Brigadier Sir, your take on this, sir?
Faisal, it is said that there is no better way to end a good way to end a bad war except ending it. Now, President Trump believed in this saying much before even when he became president. You remember his pre-election slogan that he is going to pull out from all endless wars. He is going to save a
But
lot
the
of
moment
money.
he announced about it after 2 years, sir, look at the
Right.
reaction from his
Now, 3 years
own members, the cabinet members or the secretaries, basically, sir.
Now 3 years
James
in
Barris is
government.
one example.
December last year, he announced pullout from Syria and from Afghanistan. And Syria partially done, but on Afghanistan, he had to wilt under the pressure from his own institutions, that is, State Department, the Pentagon, the DoD, or maybe Langley, because they never agreed. The system of policy making in USA is that these strategic thinkers who are mostly working in various think tanks, they make a lot of studies and a lot of discussions take place, and the parliamentarians are taken on board, the select committees come into play, a lot of discussion go in both houses of the parliament, and then some policy decision is taken. But in this case, a president comes in who takes a decision even before becoming president. Now, 3 years in office, Trump has not been able to fulfill his main promise of pulling out from Afghanistan. So this is a political challenge that Trump has, and that is why he deputed Zalmay Khalilzad as a special representative, go-getter, go and get some magic solution to the imbroglio that Afghanistan is passing through for the last 18, 19 years. So that is the context in which we are discussing this. As regards spring offensive or summer offensive, I fully agree with Ambassador Naqvi that it is more to do with climate. But it is also an operational strategy that the Taliban always exercise in order to have more leverage on the talk table, be in a position of strength. But nevertheless, the Afghan government also does that. The US government, the US forces in Afghanistan and the allies also do that. So it is something which has become a ritual in the last so many years. Now, fast forward, ever since Zalmay Khalilzad took over this responsibility, there are two types of tracks being followed for the dialogue. One track is Taliban talking to the Americans, which has seen 6 rounds already in Doha, Qatar. And the other track is that there got to be the talk between Afghans and the Taliban and the Afghan, but not the Afghan government. That is what we saw at Moscow. A few weeks back, to remember, in Moscow, the 15 top representative of Taliban, they met 50 Afghan representatives. Some of the representatives among those 50 were also of the Ashraf Ghani government. But they said, well, they are there in their private capacity. But nevertheless, that Afghan, talking to Afghan process at Moscow has already been happening. So these are two scenarios in which America is now also trying. You know, there are 4 sticking points. One is ceasefire, which is not happening. That's what we are discussing.
Exchange of
Second
prisoners.
is that Taliban got to give a pledge that they're not going to harbor any foreign terrorists. Third is that they got to talk to the Afghan government, the sitting government. And the last but not the least is that in the last program, the poppy cultivation and these sort of things, they got to overcome that. And Afghan soil will not be used for launching operations in other countries. So these are the sticking points.
I mean, Helmand is the basic main province that is the
world largest
major
opium
growth. Yes, sir.
production, you know, is called Helmand Basin along
Yeah.
the Helmand River. They are producing the maximum opium in the world, and the drug trade is taking place from there. But it has been happening for the last 18, 19 years. But why now you feel concerned about that? Because now the hands, as per their calculation, hands are about to be changed from the governance, where Taliban may predominantly come in. So they do not want them to thrive on that, forgetting that Taliban were the one who actually eliminated poppy cultivation to a large extent from when they were in the government.
They were the ones, yes, sir.
Right?
I agree,
So,
totally.
so this reverse is taking place. But I come back, now what are the scenarios for the dialogue now with Zalmay Khalilzad? The ideal scenario is that he can prevail upon Taliban and convince them that they should talk to the Afghan government, which is an ideal for the Afghan government, but not for the Taliban.
They don't recognize
Right.
them, so
So
why should
this
they talk to them?
scenario-
That's their problem.
Yeah, so this scenario has a lot of problems. Second scenario is that Afghan agreed to talk to the representative, the sort of representative coming from all over Afghanistan as they met them in Moscow. They agree to meet them and say now in Qatar. And the Afghan government representative, they form part of that, say as a, say again in a private capacity. So the American, the Afghan representative meet Taliban there. So this is the second scenario that is likely to happen, say on 19th or 20th. But so far as we were trying to figure out, the Afghan government has not been able to formalize the whole delegation. That has some problem always. But yet another scenario could be that the Taliban, you remember previously they were not even agreeing before Pakistan played its role. They were not even agreeing to talk to the Americans before they could announce their withdrawal from Afghanistan. So
They were
Pakistan
putting a lot of like sort of, ifs and buts. There were a lot of points
right.
which they
So
wanted that,
Pakistan-
these points should be discussed when we
Pakistan
meet.
is one country which made that happen. Otherwise they were not ready to sit on the table even with the Americans without American announcing the pullout. So pullout was announced, then taken back, So this has, lot of things are happening here and there, but the question marks are always there. The hybrid solution that comes to mind, which Professor Saab was also hinting at, there's a ray of hope. In this hybrid solution that is going to happen on, say, 20th of April after 2-3 days. in
But the
Qatar.
process of negotiation will not be hampered, will not be delayed, will not be derailed. Correct, sir?
Right. I believe this offensive going against each other, every side is trying to exercise this as a leverage on the table that they want to
But because
appear.
this is the first time that, when you hear the Pakistani officials or the Afghan, or not the Afghan officials, but the American officials, especially Zalmay Saab always believes that negotiation is the way forward. Now, he has, sir, honestly speaking, he's done a lot.
Yep.
He's been traveling to Europe, he's been all over the world, getting the support of the Muslim countries, Muslim leaders as well, just to make sure that at least there should be some viable solution in Afghanistan. But one thing, sir, that is something which we should all worry about is the presence of the ISIs there. Now, this is the question which I'm going to take to Professor Saab, because Professor Saab, earlier what we have witnessed is that if you look at the overall engagement, if you look at the current happenings there, sir, we used to hear a lot that whenever there was a bomb blast in Pakistan or any criminal or terrorist activity that would take place inside the Pakistani territory, whether in the big cities or in certain areas where they would hit the military checkpoints or otherwise, that was always claimed by the TTP. Now we just sort of hear a lot less about TTP, but one phenomena that is gaining strength by each passing day, whether in reality or on media, that is the presence of ISIS. Now, there was this very unfortunate incident that took place in Quetta. A lot of precious lives, about 2 dozen of them were lost. More than 4 or 5 dozen people got injured recently. Who claimed the responsibility? ISIS. Now, sir, do you believe that the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan element, which is present inside Afghanistan, they are harboring them, they are looking after them, Indians are supporting them, financing them, training them, and then they are engaging them against Pakistan? Do you think, sir, certain factions of TTP are getting enrolled in the ranks of ISIS?
It brings in another uh, perceived threat, particularly to this part of the world. And we have heard all sorts of conspiracy theories, speculations around, who's supporting ISIS, in the Islamic State in Afghanistan itself. Are they being used to wrestle away some control from the Taliban? Who the larger players are. And the interesting thing, with now the growing, prevalence of this in Afghanistan and in Southeast Asia, in our region of the world, besides sort of the Middle East and North Africa, etc., is that this will bring with it its own kinds of challenges, because the aspiration now, the geographic aspiration of ISIS in this part of the world straddles territories within Pakistan, straddles territories within Iran, and in Afghanistan. So in the same way that in the Levant they tried to create a space for themselves, which included parts of Iraq and Syria, that there's a similar aspiration here. And what that would then do to some of the other regional interests, vis-a-vis Pakistan and Iran, for instance, would be another challenge. Because I mean, if we look at history, and we look at it in the Cold War context, when the Taliban were included in the holy warrior category, and with our sort of arrangement with the US and Saudi, etc., Iran had of course been in the opposing camp, and it had brought it to have a closer long-term relationship with India, which has now had other sort of economic implications as well. So how the presence of ISIS in this part of the world will start, creating or exacerbating some of these other regional tensions is also something to watch out for. And of course, when it comes to the plight of the Hazara community, which have been there, prior to the Afghan, proxy war, and the absolute plight within a province which, which has restiveness itself, and then this sectarian issue. So I mean, all these like overlapping complications which bring in then, of course, again that regional dimension. So those are all things to be kind of watching out for, to try and understand these trends.
All right. So we'll continue our discussion. We'll just take a short break here. After the break, we'll return and we'll continue our discussion over there. Welcome back after the break. Now, Naqvi Saab, a couple of important areas to talk about. One is the current role of Pakistan. Now, sir, on one side, we were told to do more. We were told to engage the Haqqani network, and we were told not to, look after them in any way, though we were not looking after them, but they said that, since they're operating from the Pakistani soil into Afghanistan, which again, we cleared, the kind of military operations that took place during the last 10 years or so, so exceptional. I think you won't get an example of such operations anywhere in the world.
Nowhere in the world.
And successful operations. So we won those wars, we flushed them out, but now, still when you talk about the war on terror, so still Pakistan's image is not that great. Despite the fact that we have lost the max, we have done the max. But still, we suffer the most at the same time. Now, sir, this particular offensive which takes place, obviously there are certain questions which are cropping up. One is that if Taliban can listen to Pakistan, we should exert more influence. What sort of an engagement, sir, do we have with the Afghan Taliban at the moment, sir? Do you think, if we can convince them to sit on the negotiation table and at least hold some talks, despite the fact that they have reservations, the other party has reservations, but at least there's an engagement. But every time we did it, something from the Indians was totally against it, whether you talk about the declaration of regarding Mullah Muhammad Umar.
Yes.
This process was
The
derailed
Paris
earlier. Then
Mali
another
talks,
TTP leader was killed by the American drone in Balochistan. So, sir, do you feel that currently things are moving in the right direction and they've got a lot of support? When I say they, means that there is a genuine concern for the peace process, sir, in Afghanistan.
Yes. Well, you see, one thing I think is important here, Faisal, that the Indians and whoever else might be looking at this with a desire to topple the idea and to disrupt it, are now aware that the Americans are keen on this. You see, the presence of Zalmay Khalilzad, who I know from way back, he was at the Rand Corporation, and when I served in Washington for 5 years, I knew him, and he was then working for the State Department also, then NSC and all that. Zalmay is, as my colleague here said, is a go-getter and a very dynamic person. So the presence of Zalmay reflects the determination of the United States to move ahead in the peace process. And that, I think, will be a deterrent to India or whoever, whichever other state or non-state factor might be involved in trying to torpedo it. That is one. The second is that the Pakistani role, as which you talked about, Pakistani role has always been consistent. We want Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process. We want a negotiated process, not a military solution.
So when the main man is Zalmay Khalilzad, it can't be Afghan-owned and Afghan-led, sir. That's what my point is.
No, both. Then that happened in the Bonn conference also. The American role, if it is positive, and it is to bring the Afghans together and work out a solution between them, then there, I don't have a problem if the Americans want to do it, and if they are paying for their mistakes for all these years, then it's more power unto them. But the point is that Pakistan, as you said, has launched the biggest military offensive against terrorism anywhere in the world, concerted and determined military action. And secondly, Pakistan has contacts with the Afghan Taliban, deals with them, has in the past also provided them help in terms of, not really sanctuaries, but they have been coming here and they're going to hospitals or keeping their families here for safety and all that. So Pakistan maintains a consistent position, and Pakistan wants a peace process. Why? Because peace and stability in Afghanistan is very important for Pakistan.
I think for the entire region. So if you allow me, Rissa, we've been joined in by Syed Akhtar Ali, former Home Secretary and former IGP Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Assalamu alaikum, Syed Akhtar Ali Saab.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, thank you very much for taking your time out and talking to PTV World, sir. First of all, sir, your take on this latest Spring Offensive 2019. It seems as if there's a calendar, unfortunately, because they do it every year. This year, sir, how do you see this? And do you think this is going to sabotage the peace process? Because a lot of stakeholders do believe that peace process is going to continue. This is just something to, so mark your presence and make sure that when you sit down on the negotiation table, you should talk from a position of strength. Your take, Aji Saab?
Yes, of course, if you look at the history of international relations, and we have before us the example of Vietnam War. And when the parleys were between Americans and the North Vietnamese, at one moment in time, those parleys broke down, and then the United States launched an offensive, which again then pressurized the North Vietnamese to bring them to the Paris talks. Similarly, if you look at these events, the conflict in Afghanistan, for the last 17 years, and if we go back to the 90s, then it's around 40 years. So all along, we have been hearing of these spring offensives by the Taliban, and particularly while taking these parleys, which have been undertaken by Zalmay Khalilzad, and Pakistan is giving a helping hand to bring the Taliban to the negotiation table. And this is a tactical move, I would say, on part of the Taliban to gain more and more physical space and to assert their might, and then use this on the negotiation table while they are for their diplomatic victory. So this is a tactical move, and at the same time, the Afghan government, they also launched their operation known as Khalid. So as a reaction to that, the Taliban also initiated the operation known as Al-Fateh. So both sides would be trying to assert themselves to then gain on the table.
So this sort of an act hasn't yielded any results in the last, let's say, 19 years since the Americans, I would say, invaded Afghanistan. Now my point is, sir, that what is the biggest fear of the United States of America? I mean, they really want to make sure that the Taliban once should be not crushed, but should be restricted to a certain level where they can just operate, but cannot be a threat to the American government or the American forces present in Afghanistan or the Afghan government for that matter, sir.
You see, if we look at the strategic interest of the United States of America, they are more concerned that there should not be any force or a power or any government or a violent non-state actor which can directly hit their interests anywhere in the world. So the biggest threats to them were from the Al-Qaeda. As far as Al-Qaeda is concerned, they have been able to break their might and their capacity to disturb the social order in America and their vital interests in Middle East and other areas. As long as there are other forces which do not have the capacity to reach to the vital national interest of the United States of America. So to that extent, the United States would be happy, but they would also like to have their strategic presence in Afghanistan.
All right, thank you very much, Syed Akhtar Ali Saab. Now, Brigadier, one important area, since I was talking about this US fear, so in order to just make sure that a certain XYZ factor, which in one way or the other is a threat to you, obviously you won't leave them strong once you are exiting a certain place. You'll try to make sure that, you know, their power, their strength, or their mode of protest should be limited to a certain level. But now, sir, when we see Taliban, honestly speaking, seems that, you know, some major superpower or somebody is supporting them, because the kind of strength they have, number of people who are engaged, obviously they're being paid, they need weapons, they don't need training as such, I think, but obviously you need bullets, you need weapon, you know, everything, you need food, you need a commitment to fight, you need some support. There were rumors that the Russians were engaged with them, sir, and whatever the Americans did with the Russians in Afghanistan, it's kind of a similar act, but this time it's the other way around. The Russians are supporting them in order to make sure that the Americans should evacuate the Afghans. So, but over here, sir, what it seems like, that things are not that simple. I think the most complicated, if you call Syria a complicated land, or, you know, the problem, I think Afghanistan is the most complicated. There were stories that Al-Qaeda has been eliminated. They are still talking about Al-Qaeda's presence. You talk about ISI, sir, this phenomenon never existed in this region. Taliban had a very different design, not beyond the borders of Afghanistan. Obviously, they were fighting against an occupation by the Americans. But sir, in this particular case, when you talk about ISIs, rather than hearing that TTP has claimed the responsibility times, ISIs, Hamid Karzai spoke so many times about the mystery helicopters, and it seemed that these people were brought in to Afghanistan once the Americans decided to, you know, vacate Syria. And most of those fighters, whether they were Tajik, Uzbek, whoever they were, Chechens, they are present in Afghanistan now. So your take.
Thank you very much. I think in your premise, you have already covered most of the details. There are so many conspiracy theories in the eye of the West. But, you know, when Hamid Karzai, who was actually their man, who served for 8 long years in Afghanistan, on behalf of whom? The USA, and now Ashraf Ghani likewise. But when they retort and put this thing on record that IS is a proxy, the Russian president, he talked for more than 2 hours in a think tank years ago, in which he gave complete details of the reasons why Al-Qaeda, how Al-Qaeda was created, how IS is created, and wherever US has to go and decimate a country militarily, that is where
they have.
These logos are sent, okay, like franchises that they have, McDonald or whatever, sorry to say that, but this is a sort of franchise which is created in a certain region with some stated objectives. So when we look at the history of sabotage and subversion, there's a small booklet called Theories of Economic Hitman. It has been written by one of the former CIA operator, John Perkins. So in which the sabotage and subversion has many forms, and this is one form that you were trying to point out. And
but this philosophy was of 70s and 80s. Now things have changed. There's another book
very sophisticated.
With the modern 6th generation, 5th generation warfare,
so when you
look
at the IS, Islamic State, is not sectarian in outlook. They have that, as per their own given mandate, they have a global Khilafat concept. They are not like Al-Qaeda, they are not regional, they are global in nature. So why would they come and kill 8 innocent Hazaras in Quetta and take the credit for that? So it's a stage managed operation that my IQ level says. There is no reason for Islamic State to come and do this. If somebody is stage managing this,
they always think that
a country say hostile to Pakistan, any country, I am not naming any, but they would like to do this in order to spoil the forthcoming visit of Prime Minister Imran Khan to Iran, spoil overall relation on the sectarian fault line between the two brotherly Muslim countries, spoil internal cohesion, political cohesion within Pakistan.
A few days ago,
right.
This was the reason, sir.
On the one hand, say, again, John Perkins, economic theory say IMF, World Bank squeezing Pakistan, internally destabilize Pakistan on political front, law and order situation, apply maximum pressure from east, west, south.
So they'll keep you engaged in one way or the other.
So keep Pakistan under tremendous pressure, but then that contradicts the role given to Pakistan to make Afghanistan peace happen. That's Pakistan is doing. So if I am Pakistan, talking to American or Taliban, I go back to your previous question you asked Ambassador Saab. I would only give one pledge, okay? You got to promise me, I'm going to make this happen for you, that I have already, but you got to make sure that India in my backyard is my red line. I don't want to see India playing any role in Afghanistan because they have already played so many proxies, Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan and blah, blah, blah.
You name it.
All.
You name it and they're the spoilers, yes.
And they don't hide it. Ajit Doval talks to his people.
Offensive defense, I mean, his strategy is very much
on
clear.
the floor of the parliament. Modi is saying so, other ministers confessing, okay, we have made Kashmir and Balochistan for Pakistan. So we are going to make another East Pakistan for them. You know, this is all on record. This is not a conspiracy.
Yeah, Kulbhushan
So when
Yadav is
these things
networking. That was
happen-
just one person we got. I mean, there's so many more.
Right. So the
Operating all
point
over
is,
Pakistan.
when these stage managed things, say Pulwama happened, the whole world knows it was stage managed in order to get more votes, create anti-Pakistan narrative, create hate Pakistan, hate Muslim, do maximum carnage of Muslims in Kashmir and gain more votes. Modi's own party members are saying so. The other political leaders, very prominent one in India, are saying so. So this is become
latest speeches of the
a
Gandhi family,
world
yeah.
of narratives. So where you rightly pointed out, Pakistan has paid the maximum. We have won the greatest war against terrorism. More than any 50 countries in Afghanistan, Pakistan had done that magic on its own land. Whom were we fighting? Terrorists brought from all over the world into Afghanistan, pushed into erstwhile tribal areas of Pakistan. We, alhamdulillah, at a very high human and economic cost, we were able to, alhamdulillah, defeat them. So this magic has been done by Pakistani country, Pakistani nation and Pakistan armed forces. Now when we have done that, the world is not looking at it because this does not fit into their narrative.
Correct.
Because we have been now replaced by India. So India is a strategic partner in the overall global context. So they would like to give a role to India and Afghanistan, and that is where we got to make sure that this remains our red line. Whatever peace comes to Afghanistan, India is not supposed to be there to play any role.
Any dirty role,
Dirty.
primarily. Yes,
No,
whatever
when
they
you
do,
give them
they
even a
basically,
good
they're
role,
not supporting
they'll make it
the
dirty.
Afghan public or the Afghan people or the Afghan government. They are doing whatever they can do within their given capacity to make sure that hatred prevails against Pakistan and Afghanistan.
That's
and this
right.
is exactly what they're doing in Iran also. So
Exactly.
definitely we need to do a show on Iran also. But sir, final comments from you, sir.
Me? Hi. Are you talking to me?
I can't hear you. Yes.
Are you
Yeah, I
talking
can
to
hear you.
me?
Yes, I'm talking to you.
Okay. So I think that all the contours that one has that have been discussed before me, I appreciate them, and unfortunately the world is a very complex place. But I would also urge some introspection, because one is sitting elsewhere in the world in an academic environment where one can afford the luxury of being critical about all geostrategic interests, be it of the U.S. and other regional players and India and everyone else. But I mean, if we kind of think to our own role, during the 80s, during the 90s, after the expulsion of the Soviets, and whatever a marginal threat that there was, or some argue significant threat there was for Pakistan. I mean, after Afghanistan, if the Soviets had taken over at that time. However, the sheer brutality of the Taliban when they did come to power at that time, and that geostrategically was manipulated. So Leila Abu Lugha, the Palestinian scholar here, talks about the irony of how in the U.S. the war was sold. The U.S. intervention was sold that we have to save the poor Muslim women from the brutality of, we have to save poor Afghani women from the brutality of the Taliban. And of course, there were other geostrategic considerations. But, that was kind of the moral facade under which that had happened. But as far as we are concerned, I mean, be they, or whatever national security interests that are there, but we also need to have a human security perspective. So, for this long-suffering population, and I wonder, when we talk about our influence over the Taliban, was Pakistan, did it play a positive role in terms of, recent statements coming out of the Taliban that they will allow girls' education? that women are being enabled to participate, in the talks. So, I mean, I'm not following, that negotiation process that closely, but I would suspect that those are more sort of practical, tactical maneuvers, and Pakistan, needs to be thinking also, in terms of these subtleties, and have a multi-pronged arrangement rather than just having a very black and white, realpolitik, traditional, conventional security perspective, when it comes to dealing with our regional neighbor, because that will also enable us to have, a more nuanced engagement. I mean, as things stand, I mean, we don't have the financial clout that India does, but really, I mean, our proximity, the ethnic similarities, we haven't been able to use them,